Hi guys, welcome to week 4. I know we're already part way through week 4, but I just wanted to practice a new software. It's called Screencast-O-Matic and it's free. If anyone is interested, it gives you the option to basically make videos where you can show what's on the screen or do a video or do a split screen video and what's on the screen. So I'm practicing just the screencast right now. I've opened up our Canvas shell, and this is what our homepage looks like. It's familiar to you, obviously. I just wanted to point out what's happening this week, and so I'm going to guide you through the actual discussion since we didn't get to do it this week since we had a timed writing. I'm just hovering over the first discussion to kind of show you where I'm going. Excuse me. So as it says on the homepage, this week is all about rhetoric. We've already discussed rhetoric a little bit, scratching the surface, about the art of persuasion, using language and images and phrases and appeals to our audience. And so we're going to be looking at that throughout the semester. This is really important for yourself as a writer, so you can decide how you want your voice to be, what the tone you want to be is for your reader. But especially when you're watching advertisements and readings like Martin Luther King's letter from Birmingham jail and Henry David Thoreau's Civil Disobedience, which we'll be reading later in the semester. So just as a reminder, the way that rhetoric works is it's useful to you as a writer so you can make conscious choices about how you want to sound to your audience, but it's also useful to you as a reader in the sense that when you do critical readings of texts, of books, of novels, of films, it allows you a heightened awareness of what you're seeing and the messages that you're receiving. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the first discussion for week 4, which is Rhetorical Triangle, Framework, and Analysis. Okay, so this is what pops up. So there's 2 handouts on here. Both of them are in your packet. One of them is the rhetorical triangle, and the second one is rhetorical analysis. They're essentially the same thing, discussed in different ways. The most important aspect of the rhetorical framework is the rhetorical triangle. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that PDF. Okay, so the rhetorical triangle is made up of 3 components, and we'll discuss this in class. This is just our first kind of jump into it. Some of this we've already discussed, but we didn't use these terms. When I reference the rhetorical triangle, what I am referencing is logos, or reason, pathos, or values and beliefs, and ethos, the credibility of the writer. So here is our triangle. So I'm just looking at the actual handout. This entire framework comes from Aristotle. It comes from Greek rhetoric, which we discussed very briefly when we went over a rhetorical framework a few weeks ago in class, and I kind of brainstormed on the board, and we talked a little bit about Natalie Goldberg and her tone and her voice, right? So just looking at the handout, we're looking at Aristotle teaches that a speaker's ability to persuade an audience is based on how well the speaker appeals to that audience in 3 different areas. Here's where we have the rhetorical triangle: logos, ethos, and pathos. So you're going to consider these appeals as a writer and as a reader, right? We're calling someone who is an orator, someone who is using the rhetorical framework, a rhetorician. And here's the triangle. We have logos, appeals to reason. It can also be thought of as the text of the argument, as well as how well a writer has argued his or her point. So when I think of logos, I think of logic. It's very easy to follow an argument that is logical, and what makes it logical, if you've taken philosophy or even studied math, is that A plus B equals C. It's really clear, right? We have argument, we have support for the argument, we have evidence for the argument, and so whether or not you agree with the argument itself, it is a solid argument. Okay, so rhetorical framework isn't necessarily about whether or not you agree with the argument, it's how the argument is constructed and how it makes you feel as a reader, right? You may or may not agree, but you may say, you know what, it's a valid argument. And so that's the place that we're trying to come to, a place where you can look objectively at an argument and kind of break it down and analyze it to see what makes the argument either solid and good or fall apart and weak. So then we have ethos, which is appeal to the writer's character. So ethos can be thought of as the role of the writer in the argument, how credible or believable his or her argument is. So ethos is really important because what happens with ethos with someone, I'll give you an example of Martin Luther King Jr., and this is also in your text, They Say, I Say. They reference Martin Luther King Jr. Many people reference him for several reasons. So he has a certain amount of credibility. One, we all know who he is, right? We know that he is known for being this very passionate, thoughtful, biblical kind of speaker. So he has the cadence of a pastor when he speaks. He has the language of love, the language of the Bible. He's overall a pacifist. Those are types of ethos when we look at his argument. We have this sense that he is credible for many reasons. One, because he's well known. One, because he's a great orator and speaker. And one, because we hear his speeches over and over and over. They pop up throughout our kind of American culture and our American psyche. So that is ethos. Very important. So you can apply this to anyone. This could be like a sports commentator. Maybe you are into sports and you know there's a certain sports commentator who has ethos, who has like cred. It's similar to credibility, like street cred, right? Maybe this sports guy, grew up playing sports, was in the NFL, and now he's a sportscaster and he talks about sports. So I know we can think of several of them. I'm not a sports person, so I'm not really sure who they are. I know that Emmitt Smith, the Deion Sanders, played for many years for Dallas Cowboys and have also been commentators. So they have a certain sense of appeal because of their experience and their ability to talk about football in a way that is believable because they've done it, they've played it, they know what it's like, right? And they can talk about it, they have that language. So the next one in the rhetorical triangle is pathos. This is the appeal to emotions and the sympathetic imagination, as well as the beliefs and values. So it can be thought of as the role of the audience in the argument. This one is super crucial because we are human beings who function through emotions, hopefully, right? And hopefully we're able to control our emotions as well. There's something known as emotional intelligence, and that's the ability to have emotions but also be able to control and regulate our emotions. Pathos is one of those parts of the rhetorical framework that is crucial, and I think it's really easy to understand when you look at advertising. So when you look at advertising and you think of a simple commercial, like a Bud Light commercial, whether it's the Clydesdale ponies or horses, or whether it's a puppy, anytime you see an advertisement that's kind of pulling on your heartstrings, that is pathos. That's kind of using the emotions of the audience to kind of appeal to them. Martin Luther King Jr. also did this as well. And we see this when he's talking about his own children asking questions about why they're not allowed to go to the amusement park because they're colored, right? So that's an appeal to emotions. And he says, how do I explain to my daughter? How do I explain to my son? That is pathos, whenever you're kind of drawing on that emotion. It's super effective, and it's very important when you're composing an argument because it's the humanity side of your argument. If you're talking about beauty, referencing your own experience of maybe not feeling beautiful for whatever reason. If you're talking about issues of health, maybe you were obese and you had to struggle through that in order to become healthy, in order to be aware of your own health. Drawing on your own personal experience is a form of pathos, so you can convince your reader to try and listen to what you have to say and that what you say is credible because you've gone through it. So again, this is the rhetorical triangle. We're separating them to analyze them, but again, it's a triangle. These belong together. So we're going to separate them to analyze them, but there's a spectrum, right? And so they are connected. They're connected. And so that's really important to keep in mind. They kind of bleed into each other. And if you see it that way, it's a lot easier to understand. So let me make sure I've gone over kind of what I think is important on this particular handout. So here's questions on page 2. These are important because questions can always help you open up access to something, because when your brain asks a question, it's seeking out an answer, and that's opening up to intake information. So go ahead and skim over the questions so you can see how they would apply if you're actually looking at a reading. And for us this week, you're going to use these questions when you're looking specifically at advertisement. So I'll go over the final thought. While the above questions can help you identify or utilize or use logos, ethos, and pathos in writing, it is important to remember that sometimes a particular aspect of a text will represent more than one of these appeals. And so that leads us actually nicely into understanding the overlap of these concepts and also into our next section, which is rhetorical analysis and framework. So I'll go ahead and click on that one. So this handout I made when I was in graduate school and when I was teaching at the university. My teachers taught me to look at writing as rhetorical. And so these are some of the components that we came up with, students came up with, and we decided they were really great ways into the rhetorical framework, into the rhetorical triangle. So you can take these and you can overlap them with the rhetorical triangle. They are not separate. They are part of the rhetorical triangle. And so just as a reminder, the definition of rhetoric, according to Aristotle, is the ability to see or identify in any given circumstance the available means of persuasion, right? So rhetoric itself is the study of how writers and speakers use the words to influence an audience, not just the content of what they're talking about. So the how equals techniques and moves that they're making. This is the craft of writing. This is the craft of composing an idea and sharing it. Just think about the speakers, motivational speakers, the ones that are effective. Tony Robbins, there's a Louise Hay, there's Eric, oh my goodness, what's his last name? I can't remember. There's all these motivational speakers that we're drawn to. Eric Thomas, I believe. That we know when we watch them, they motivate and inspire us, right? This could be someone, for working out. This could be for eating healthy. This could be for changing your diet. This could be for setting goals and reaching them. This could be motivation for anything, but motivational speakers understand rhetoric very clearly, and that is why they're effective. A horrible, horrible example would be Hitler. He was very effective at delivering a message in a way that the group of people that he was speaking with wanted to follow him. And so that's kind of the dark side, the negative side of rhetoric, how it can get people to do bad, terrible, mean things. And so we're looking at, our example here on this handout would be Martin Luther King, I Have a Dream speech, which is the opposite, right? It's positive. It's a positive speech to enact change during civil rights, many of which those things we're still fighting for today, in different ways. So again, the rhetorical analysis, rhetorical framework, these are the components here. If you look at 1 through 7, and again, there is a disclaimer on this handout, and it says, brain may explode as a result of information overload. So it's okay. When you read over this, no one's asking you to memorize these techniques. No one's asking you to be some expert on rhetoric, because guess what? You can go deeper and deeper, and you could study this for your entire life, and you would continue to learn new things. So I just want to remind you that it's a lot of information. So here on the rhetorical framework key, these are the components that we're looking at. You can perform this analysis on any text, a poem, an advertisement, a novel, a short story, a movie, a film, etc. You can even apply it to the environment in your classroom. You can apply it to the way that someone appears to you by looking at the way they speak, the way they dress, the way they carry themselves, right? If you view the entire world as a text, then you can use a rhetorical framework to analyze the world. Here are the components, and I'm going to go over them briefly because my time on the video is going to run out. With Scriptomatic, you're allowed 15 minutes. So the components are purpose, audience, situation, ethos, which we discussed earlier, message, writing devices, and authority referenced. Again, you can plug these into the rhetorical framework, into the rhetorical triangle, into ethos, logos, and pathos. Remember, we're looking at the how. So the rhetorical triangle involves 3 things: the speaker, the person composing the idea, the audience, the person receiving the idea, and the subject matter, whatever is being discussed, right? So with Martin Luther King, I Have a Dream, the speaker would be king, the subject would be racial equality and being able to dream and pursue those dreams with fairness, and the audience would be people in the 1960s. It would be us. It would be people over the last 60 years, 50 years who have studied his work, right? So the audience for his piece is broad because he's far-reaching. So here are the components, and they're broken down. You can look at purpose, right? The purpose of the text. What is the writer trying to do? That's the first one. The second one, the audience. Who is their sense of audience? Maybe when you're writing a letter to your mom, your audience is just your mom, right? Whereas when you're writing a letter to the courts, maybe you're having to go through something at court or something with the lawyer or something that requires a little bit more seriousness, right? Maybe you're using different language. That's a different audience. Situation, which is really important. What is the situation prompting the writing? What was the situation prompting Martin Luther King to have to share I Have a Dream, right? We know the situation. It's the civil rights. It's inequality. It's discrimination. It's a lot, right? So what is the situation prompting the writing? And you can look at that today as well. Look at Trump's language and the things that he says and the way that our republic responds to that. Number 4 is ethos or persona, which we discussed. It's